Too often, you put in place a workplace violence prevention program, only to find after the fact that it is not workplace violence prevention, it is workplace violence reaction. Now, why is that so important to be able to get out in front of and prevent workplace violence? Well, recent studies demonstrate that from the moment of commitment, that's when a person pulls a weapon and starts shooting, to the moment of completion, when the last round is discharged, can be as little as 5 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, if you intend to react, i.e. crisis management, active shooter training, you are going to be stepping over those slain during those first horrific 5 seconds. That is unacceptable. I intend to demonstrate to you how you can get out in front of that horrific moment of commitment. What I want to share with you, the word revolutionary was presented here this evening. To be able to demonstrate how truly revolutionary it is, I have to slay some myths. So the first part of my presentation to you will be the slaying of myths, things we think provide prevention but do not. Then I'm going to build a case from ground up that demonstrates how you can effectively get out in front and prevent violence from occurring. But I'm going to go a step further. I'm going to show you how you can do this in an empirical and forensic way. For those of you where quantitative results are important, I'm going to show you how not just qualitatively, but quantitatively you can demonstrate that your organization is as safe as possible. Look, we all know that safe is not possible with humans. To be absolutely 100% safe doesn't exist. But you can be reliably safe. I'm going to demonstrate to you how you can do that. So, we call it the critical aggression prevention system. Focus on that word system. Yes, there's training involved, but there's also software. I had the occasion, there's a man here in Florida that was a renowned director of security for 5 hospitals. And he was renowned in that he belonged to all the associations and he was highly respected by all. But he was let go because he was unable to convince his chief financial officer that his team, he and his team, was worthy of their investment. What did they do? They hired Wackenhut, now G4. How do you tell if your place is safe? If you've had a safe environment, the effort and the time and the talent that you've put forward? How do you determine at the end of the year that what you've done is worthy of the investment they've made in you? Is there this profound silence? No one's died? No one's been injured? Is that how you do it? From a workplace violence perspective, I'm going to demonstrate to you how you can quantify what your value is. So with that said, let's get started. What I want to share with you is how your organization can rise to the level where it is as safe as possible, the highest form of evidence-based best practices. To do that, I'm going to illustrate why current approaches fall short of our expectations. Then, I'm going to talk to you about CAPS, the Critical Aggression Prevention System, and how and why it is the solution. Then, how to implement CAPS. Is it difficult? No, it's frankly quite easy. Then, we'll answer a couple of questions, but most of the questions we will answer at the booth. So we'll be there the rest of the day for you to come up and ask any specific questions you may have, and then we can also at that time talk to you about what next steps might be available. Okay. What I'd like to share with you initially is a video clip. It's only about 2 minutes long, but in this video clip, ladies and gentlemen, there is a terrorist, or terrorist plural. At the end of this presentation, you're going to see an image, after I show you this video. At the end of this video, I'm not going to tell you who the terrorist is, but during this process, I'm going to illustrate to you how you can identify. Now, why is it important to identify a terrorist? Because, ladies and gentlemen, a perpetrator of murder-suicide is the most lethal kind of aggressor. And their body language and behavior and communication indicators are the same as a terrorist. So if you can identify a terrorist and get out in front of a terrorist, you can also get out in front of a perpetrator of murder-suicide. And let me tell you, they are on the rise. You know, I get Google alerts on murder-suicides. And I can go through and there'll be 30 every day. Now, you would think that, well, I don't hear about people committing murder-suicide. Usually it's an ex-spouse against another and a third party possibly, and it's all considered local news and we don't hear about it. But Google alert for yourself murder-suicide and see how many they come up. They are on the rise, ladies and gentlemen. So, let's take a little look at video here. Can you identify the terrorist or terrorist plural? As I said, when we get done here, as you leave, now I have only 300 and I think we have 400 or 500 people, but as you go out, get from Christine that one sheet, circle who you think it might be, both singular or plural, and bring it to the booth and I will share you the answer. But during this presentation, I expect to show you how to identify that terrorist or terrorist plural. So what's the problem here? Look, we know what the problems are, right? We understand them, their violence, their bullying, that's a term of art today, their verbal abuse, discrimination, militancy, and yes, even today, terrorism. We used to think terrorism was something that was going to happen overseas, but a recent survey demonstrated that 81% of Americans think there are an imminent attack from ISIS. And when you look at Fort Hood shooting and the Boston bombers and the others, ladies and gentlemen, we need to make open our minds to address the issue of terrorism. Look, we know what the root causes of these things are. Religious fervor, political extremism, etc., etc. They're all up there. The question is, what is the connection? If we're going to prevent, we have to get out in front of, right? We have to get out from between the root causes and the actual events themselves. And we've come to realize that that connection is aggressive behavior. Now, anytime we talk about aggressive behavior, we must make a distinction between assertive behavior and aggressive behavior. Assertive behavior says, I'm going to win because I'm going to be the best that I can be. Whereas aggressive behavior says, I'm going to win because I'm going to take you out. Aggressive behavior is inappropriate behavior under any circumstances. Yet I hear people all the time telling others to go out and be aggressive. If something is aggressive, it is destructive and it is negative. If something is constructive and positive, it is assertive behavior. If you're not making that distinction, ladies and gentlemen, where does good aggression end and bad aggression begin? That's why we have boxers biting each other's ears off. Basketball players throwing chairs in the stands at people there to visit and enjoy the game. So, the reality is, from our context, it is aggressive behavior. And the key is, let's take a look at the systems we have in place. Threat assessment. How many here have threat assessment teams? Threat assessment? Okay. All right. A couple of you do. Anybody, we have any colleges and universities in here? Please raise your hand. Colleges and universities? Okay. Well, colleges and universities tend to have behavioral intervention teams. And these are promising. But the problem we have is that we have too many approaches and too many different languages. In a college campus, which may be the most sophisticated, I do a lot of work on college campuses, which is probably the most sophisticated approach to addressing this issue, you have mental health professionals. Do we have any mental health professionals in the room? Okay. We have mental health professionals who use distressed, disturbed, and dysregulated to identify an aggressor. It's too subjective. Then we have law enforcement using reasonable suspicion and probable cause. Any law enforcement officers here or former law enforcement officers? Okay, very good, very good. Reasonable suspicion and probable cause. Now, a campus, whether it's campus security or corporate security or law enforcement, can talk to any individual. But if you want to start a chain of evidence, you better be at reasonable suspicion or probable cause, lest you put yourself and your organization at greater risk, both of liability and of threat. And then we have human resource, people handling conduct, and they're using gut instinct. Sadly, the problem that this causes is that they also cause departmental silos. I have not been in a workplace yet where human resources said to me, you know, we're a little bit concerned that security could get too heavy-handed. And security has said and whispered in my ear, you know, we're a little bit concerned that human resource doesn't quite understand what threat it is, what's happening in the way of threat that is being posed. And because of it, they keep all their information in close. This creates departmental silos, and they create gaps that simply aggressors walk through. We need a common language that all professionals can use And that language is the language of aggressive behavior. Then let's say you put in place a threat assessment team, and you announce to your organization, all the employees, we have a wonderful threat assessment team, and we want everybody, if you see something suspicious, the new saying is, if you see something, say something, right? What happens? You get barraged by these subjective references of scary, strange, weird, and menacing, right? How do you analyze that? It requires a lot of human capital, but then you get to the scene and you've got someone that a manager, a supervisor says, get this employee out of my office and off this workplace, out of this workplace immediately, right? And of course you can't. There's a due diligence process. So you start to interview this person, and what do you find out? Well, this individual has said some things, and because the manager or supervisor lives in this subjective world of scary, strange, weird, and menacing, they overreacted to it. Or, worse yet, in loco parentis, they've tried to be sort of surrogate parents, and because of it, they've tried to minimize, to normalize what is actually threatening language, and when they finally get scared enough to call you in, it's a real threatening situation. A dangerous situation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to get out in front with some real definition to move forward, and that's what we're going to share with you. These vague, the subjective references cause vague reporting, misdiagnosis too often, and it actually makes a place less safe and more susceptible to liability. Also, we often think of things that we think provide prevention, but in fact only provide reaction. Crisis management is, in fact, a reaction to an existing crisis, right? Threat assessment is often seen as a prevention tool. But isn't threat assessment, by its very definition, an assessment of an existing threat? Now, your hope is to identify an initial lesser threat and thereby prevent a subsequent greater threat. But there's no assurance that that initial lesser threat will not be a threat to life and limb. Now, I could quote thousands of examples of this, ladies and gentlemen, but let's take just one. The Navy Yard shooter. We all are aware of that. When did the Navy learn that Aaron Alexis was a threat? When he was killing people. 13 people before security arrived. That's unacceptable. We're going to show you how to get out in front of that. We use conflict resolution. That's sort of a basic program, isn't it? Conflict resolution gets out in front and tries to prevent it. But isn't conflict resolution, in fact, a reaction to an existing conflict? Same thing goes for bullying. Bullying presupposes someone exhibiting bullying behavior, doesn't it? You're reacting to bullying. We see this with discrimination all the time, don't we? I mean, when EEOC came in and required each and every one of you to train your employees on discrimination, we saw the spike that occurred. But the spike remains high. Why? No one's teaching you how to prevent discrimination. They're only teaching you how to react and report discrimination. So you need to get out in front and prevent discrimination. We're going to show you how. Can we predict? Can we predict future violence? We cannot 100% absolutely predict, but we can reliably predict. Again, I'm going to show you how to do that. But some of these programs are thought to provide some form of prediction. One of those is called profiling, right? Everybody talks about profiling. Look, the Israelis keep their airport safe. Why can't we keep ours safe? Well, one of the most thorough studies on this subject was a collaboration between the U.S. Secret Service, the Department of Education, and the National Institute of Justice, who collaborated to identify a school shooter. It's called the Safe School Initiative, one of the most thorough studies on this topic. What did it find out? It found out that there is no useful method, no accurate and useful method to identify a school shooter through profiling, nor for assessing the risk that a particular student may pose for school-based targeted violence. Well, wait a moment now. You see, what they identified, what we've known all the way along, is that what profiling does do is that it tells us that within a certain group of people, there's a higher probability of a shooter. Ladies and gentlemen, it does not tell us who the next shooter is. Hence the rub. Mental health assessments. Every time we see a killing on TV, what do we hear? That person's crazy, right? This person has got to be crazy because they shot people. No. After the horrific shooting at Virginia Tech, the President of the United States said, I want a study done on this. And a very thorough study was done, and it was called the Report to the President on Issues Raised by Virginia Tech Tragedy. And what it said was that most people with mental illness are not violent, and most people who are violent do not have mental illness. In fact, they found out that most people that have mental illness tended to be the victims of this behavior, not the perpetrators of it. Let's explore that further. Sung Hee Cho, the shooter at Virginia Tech, killed 32 people, meant to kill 57. Everybody knew this man was a problem. So what did they do? They sent him for analysis, for a mental health evaluation. 3 times in the 12 months before he effected that violence. And in each and every occasion, he was deemed to be distressed, anxious, but not, I repeat, not at risk of hurting himself or others. How about Jared Loughner? Remember Jared Loughner, the Pima Community College person who's killed 6 people, shot Congresswoman Gabrielle Gifford, who survived, thank God? Here is a man who clearly had a thought disorder, was probably schizophrenic, one of the scariest of all mental illnesses. But ladies and gentlemen, we know that of all schizophrenics, 0.2% have actually shot and killed another human being. How do you get from 0.2% to that's our next shooter? Are we going to put all people with schizophrenia into an asylum so that we can be protected from the 0.2%? No. So using mental illness as a means of identifying who the next shooter is not an effective tool. So what's the solution? Well, that very thorough study between the U.S. Secret Service, the Department of Education, and the National Institute of Justice gave a solution. What did they say? They said an inquiry should focus instead on body language and behavior and communication indicators to determine whether someone is planning or preparing for an attack. But the real key was when they said it is imperative to identify someone on the path to violence. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. You need to be able to identify someone on the path to violence. Well before this study was done, 21 years ago, we had discovered what we call emerging aggression, which is a path to violence. 21 years ago. And only recently, or about a year ago, the FBI came in and said, The Behavioral Analysis Unit of Behavioral Threat Assessment Center said, the ability to prevent violence is predicated on identifying a person who is on the pathway to violence. Yes, that's the solution. Identifying someone on the path to violence. So what do we need to do? We need to have a continuum of aggression that has a trigger phase, an escalation phase, and a crisis phase. If we're going to identify someone on the path to violence, we actually prefer emerging aggression. Because a path to violence means you need to see violence to be able to consider it on the path. But then you'll miss bullying and conflict and discrimination and a whole host of maladies. Emerging aggression begins where aggression begins. So we actually get out in front of even bullying and conflict. So we like the term emerging aggression. So a solution must be predicated on emerging aggression. That must be foundational if you truly want to prevent. Then training. Obviously, you cannot train all people with all skills, right? So you need to have a scalable method of training. So what we train is we believe you should have observers, people that can be trained in a day just simply to identify measurable, objective observables. They then call that information into a small core group of people who we call certified aggression managers. These individuals are trained not only to identify the emergence of aggression, but how do you apply the corresponding skill sets so as to maximize your result? Wouldn't that be wonderful if you could do that in an objective and measurable way? So we have trained responders. And then finally, if your system is going to be empirical and forensic to demonstrate that your place is as safe as possible, the highest form of evidence-based best practices, you must have a software-based program that identifies aggressive behavior, tracks that aggressive behavior, and demonstrates the results of that. Oh, wait a moment, but you can't do that. HIPAA regulations, right? No. Remember, we don't use any mental illness in any way, form, any shape or form to assess someone's potential for violence. So we fall outside of HIPAA. Well, wait a minute, what about privacy regulations, right? Well, we don't use any cultural differences at all. So we don't contravene the privacy regulations. So yes, you can record and track this behavior and demonstrate the value of this benefit. There you are. The critical aggression prevention system, this has been scientifically validated with over 3 years worth of use at Eastern Kentucky University. And it actually scientifically validates in real time. I'll demonstrate how in a moment. And it is the highest form of evidence-based best practices. I want to show this video to you. What does aggression look like? So let's see what aggression actually looks like.
We've got a major problem on our hands. Remember those 3,000 swizzle loops that we pulled for breakage? Somehow we got shipped to 500 stores. We've got a major problem. Our boss is furious. Now how did this happen, George?
Don't blame me for this. I have to take responsibility for every screw up around here. Who the hell are you yelling at me?
It's your part, Dad. As far as the boss is concerned, it's your butt that's on the line, not mine. Now let's try to...
Forget it, I'm going to get coffee, you can sit on the swivel.
The hell you are. And we've got to settle this right now.
How many times have I covered for you when you first got here? Butt out.
And you are history.
Move it, mister. I'll put your face in it. I mean it.
The only thing you're pushing is 60.
Does that look familiar? That's what we often see as aggressive behavior, but it's more than this. You see, what I want to share with you is what we discovered 21 years ago was there were two kinds of aggression. What you've just seen is what we call primal aggression, built on the primal instincts of fight or flight. Fueled by adrenaline, that connection between aggression, the production of adrenaline, the increase in the heart rate, and the resulting body language and behavior that we can identify, but most importantly, we can measure. Ladies and gentlemen, when I was working with the military, we were using infrared. If we could get a square inch of skin, we could identify a person's pulse rate remotely and actually watch it go up and down based on the stimulus. This is really hard science. But what we also realized when we made this discovery was that this was the aggression of someone losing control. Isn't that a wonderful image? We call it the red-faced, ready-to-explode guy. So if this is someone losing control, what is conscious, deliberate aggression? It didn't fit. So for this, we develop cognitive aggression. Conscious, deliberate aggression, or non-conscious in that someone repeats it often enough, they no longer give a lot of thought, and they become a vicious person. Quite simply, this is built upon intent. What is your intent with this person or persons? Is it in your interest and theirs, therefore a win-win as it ought to be? Or is it in your interest and to their detriment? In other words, you're going to victimize this person. You are becoming a victimizer. 21 years ago, that word was not even in the dictionary. We had to create it. So we're going to show you 9 clearly defined stages or levels of cognitive aggression. But one of the first things I want to demonstrate to you is the first grouping are the victimizers. Next, the predators. Predators look for easy prey, right? So if you look like easy prey, you tend to become their next victim. But the key here is predators are intent-driven. It's not about you, it's about what you own or you have that they want, like a criminal intent, like a robbery. The highest level of cognitive aggression is the terrorist, someone who wishes to evoke terror in the hearts and minds of their victims. Or what we locally know better as the perpetrator of murder-suicide. Let me introduce you to Zachariah Moussaoui, sometimes referred to as the 20th hijacker. And I think at a quick glance, you look at their facial expressions, they look rather dramatically different, don't they? Ladies and gentlemen, the vast majority of security and law enforcement see the guy at the top as their most threatening individual. But in point of fact, that person, although in extreme, can be lethal. Most typically, that person can be diffused. Whereas the guy on the bottom is far, far more dangerous, far, far more threatening. You see, because we discovered this 21 years ago when 9/11 happened, we thought, well, we might be able to help identify a terrorist. So we found ourselves in front of the directors of behavioral science for both the FBI and the TSA at Quantico at the FBI Academy. I have to tell you, that place is a daunting place. And the director of FBI's behavioral science unit said, we'd like you to understand that out of every 200 individuals who request a presentation in front of us, we permit one. That says volumes about our interest in your subject matter. At the end of the presentation, they gave me a publication. It represented all of the devices that they'd either developed or were in the process of developing to identify a terrorist in an airport. And after reading it, I explained to them, I said, the problem you have is you're identifying a primal aggression. You're using stress, anxiety, orbital flushing, darting eyes. These are the body language and behavior of a smuggler, but it is not the body language of a terrorist. You see, a terrorist goes a step further. An aggressor disconnects. You see, you have to, as a human, you have to disconnect from your victim in order to attack them. You have to depersonalize them, turning them into an object in order to attack them. We know that. However, a terrorist goes a step further, or a perpetrator of murder-suicide. You see, they disconnect from their own well-being to the point where they find a profound calm. Why? Because they're completely, totally disconnected from their own well-being. This is why they have no compunction about killing multiples of people, regardless of age or gender. This is why a terrorist can blow themselves up with their own children in the back seat. This is how Adam Lanza could walk into that poor Connecticut elementary school and shoot and kill 20 children, along with 6 adults, before he put a bullet in his own head. You see, they disconnect further. You want to identify that individual? Here's the key. We have found that any human being, regardless of your culture, your gender, your education, your age, or position in a community, any human being, when you rise to the level where you're prepared to give up your life for a cause, your body responds to that intention by losing animation. Quite simply, your body says, I'm dead. And that's the look you take. What do you see up there? You see what the military refer to as a 1,000-yard stare. Others refer to it as dead eyes. But it's more than that. The whole body language and behavior loses animation. It is a profound disconnection with our own well-being. And here's the key. The moment they rise to that intention, they take on that look. There's nothing they can do to get out of it. So they come to your parking garages or your parking lots with that look. They enter into your grounds with that look. They enter into your building past your receptionist with that look. They enter their workplaces with that look. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have aggression-first observers, an army of aggression-first observers, you can get out in front of that and have them call the certified aggression manager, and within an instant, they can be there to get out in front of that horrific moment of commitment. How do you identify a terrorist? That is how. Now here's the continuum that actually shows you aggressive behavior from its outset, not just when you can see violence before you, but at the very outset of aggressive behavior. Very simple graphic that illustrates. On the right, you see the primal aggressor, losing control, that red-faced, ready-to-explode guy. On the left, you see intent-driven aggression from its outset. Now, as we showed in that initial graphic of that arrow, there is a trigger phase. Little explosions that go off in the heads. We saw that with George in the video, didn't we? So what happened with George? What was the first thing that happened to George that set his day off wrong? He woke up late. Very good. Then what happened? No coffee or breakfast. Now his stomach's grumbling. He gets 3/4 of the way down the driveway. Then what happened? The trash day. He forgot trash. Now he got into traffic. Those are things that happen to us all. The little explosions that go off in our heads. The difference is, ladies and gentlemen, we cope. We cope. When a person stops coping, when one trigger begins to accumulate on top of the next, we enter into the escalation phase, what we call mounting anxiety. Mounting anxiety because it changes us. It changes what? It changes our body language. It changes our behavior, which changes the way we communicate with each other. We can identify these changes, even at the earliest possible moment. These are subtle things, but if you can identify them prior to conflict, bullying, discrimination, etc., then you can actually get out in front and prevent those things from occurring, right? Because bullying, conflict, and discrimination are all at the fourth level of cognitive aggression. So all you need to do to learn the precursors, therefore foresee this behavior coming so that you can get out in front and prevent it, is you need to learn what the stages 1, 2, and 3 look like. The moment you know how to do that, you can get out in front and actually prevent conflict, bullying, and discrimination. That's why we like to call it emerging aggression, because at those levels you don't see violence yet. These are subtle things, but it empowers you to get involved and start to process. And also, you wonder why. Look, an incident occurs, and there are people standing around. Aren't there always people standing around? And they all say, look, we knew Bob. We knew Bob was an exploder. And you say, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you share it with us? Well, I can tell you very simply why. Humans tend to do what they believe is in their best interest. Is that a fair statement? Right? They don't see it in their best interest to get involved, so they don't. And all of the instruction about the culture of reporting and all that is wasted time. When they learn about this continuum, and they can see that this lower level can very quickly become one of these higher levels, and they can become a victim in the process, guess what? Now they see they have the impetus to get involved. Now they see that it's in their best interest to get involved early so they can prevent themselves becoming a victim. Because for the first time, someone's actually connected these lower levels of aggression with what potentially can be, on this continuum, violence. You notice that at the lower, during the escalation phase, they're conjoined. The arrows are conjoined. What does that mean? It means primal and cognitive aggression feed off each other. You see, if I don't see myself as an aggressor, but for this example, I will be an inconsiderate person. Is that really aggressive behavior? Yeah. So I'm an inconsiderate individual, and I say something that offends you. You get a boost of adrenaline. That's primal. You decide to say something to me. That's intent-driven. That's cognitive. I'm offended by what you said to me. Now I get a boost of adrenaline. That's primal. I decide to act against you. That's intent-driven. That's cognitive. You see, one feeds off the other until we reach the crisis phase. Let's take a look at the crisis phase. Remember, primal aggression is someone losing control. So what do we see? We see someone who is spiraling out of control into panic and or rage. And yes, in the extreme, this person can be lethal. But most typically, this person can be diffused. But let's look at the other side, the cognitive aggressor. Incidentally, that's Sung-Hee Cho, the Virginia Tech shooter. And what do we see here? We see someone who has become tactical. Now, if you've been in the military, you probably think tactical means well thought out, and it can be very well thought out. Sung-Hee Cho chained the back of that building so he could maximize his kill rate. But it doesn't have to be well thought out. Sung-Hee Cho, what I mean by tactical is they've identified their target and they're committed to the destruction of that target. And that behavior becomes paramount to this individual. And that's how you get out in front. That's one of the ways that we get out in front. That disconnection, that process of disconnection, and identifying someone who has identified their target and they're pursuing that target. In the 9th stage, and here's the definition, we have the murder-suicide or terrorist, whose goal it is to give up their life for a cause. Please understand that. Whose goal it is to give up their life for a cause. Because that's how you identify this person. And you never, ever want to approach this person in uniform, ladies and gentlemen. If you approach this person in uniform, it is quite likely they will begin shooting immediately, or if they have explosives, push that button. Because their goal is to give up their life for a cause. The 8th level is the murderer, or in a military sense, a combatant, who is prepared to give up their life for a cause, but intend to survive. In the case of the combatant, to kill more people tomorrow. And their behavior reflects that intention. Understand the word intention. The 7th level, what I like to call the complicit tactician. Completely complicit with the 8th and 9th level. They want certain people to die, but they're not going to kill them, nor are they going to put themselves that much at risk. They're going to inspire other people to do so, like the late Osama bin Laden, or a terrorist handler, or in a domestic sense, an accomplice. Each is a precursor to the next level. Each give you the ability to foresee something coming, get out in front of it, and actually prevent it from occurring. But more importantly, you've seen the 6th, 7th, and 8th. The 7th, 8th, and 9th level, but there's a 6th, a 5th, a 4th, a 3rd, a 2nd, a 1st, and a 0 baseline. And every venue has a baseline, doesn't it? You walk into your office, you know what you expect to see. You walk on your workplace campus, you know what you expect to see. Into your garage or parking lot, you will know what you expect. Now we're looking for aggressive deviations that are objective, measurable observables. Wouldn't that make your life so much easier? I want to share something. I talked to you about how tactical this individual gets, this individual that rises to this level. I want you to watch this little video clip, very short, but it illustrates a young man in Freedom High School in Tampa. He was a month or 2 months away from conducting a Columbine type of incident. I want you to notice how very tactical, not just the strategies, but the language he uses.
For those of you retards who don't know who I am, I'm Freedom High School shooter. Well, I will be in a couple months, but I thought I could run over your game, but I don't care. They got two for my plan is to set a bomb here, point A, here, point B, point C, and point D. Then I gotta get to the side entrance of the school by 7:24. The bomb's brought 7:26, and then I'm gonna advance on the corridor. I'm gonna come in and advance on the corridor. Probably at least 60 people come to the door. Then shoot everybody at the front desk. Mr. Stanford is right here, I gotta kill him. Miss Conley is here, I gotta kill her. Mr. Pierce is here, I gotta make sure he doesn't die, because I like him. Did I choose to think like this? No, that's just how I am. If you don't like it, just find a way to find people like me. Just line us up and shoot us.
Pretty chilling, huh? These young people are now matriculating into your workplaces. Back just after World War II, General Marshall did a survey and found out that 15% of his foot soldiers raised a weapon, aimed at another human being, and pulled the trigger with the intent of killing someone. That's right. 85% were unable to do it because the instinct not to kill another human being was that great. And obviously that wasn't acceptable for the military. So they went away from shooting at a bullseye to shooting at a silhouette. They'd pop it up, shoot, drop back down again. Pop it up, shoot, drop back down again. In other words, they turned it into an impulse shot. And because of that, in the Korean War, they were up over 52% shoot rate, and in the Vietnam War, up over 92% shoot rate. Now let's change horses for a moment. Michael Carneal, Paducah, walks into a school, there's a prayer group, and he starts shooting. The moment that first round goes off, the place is in turmoil. People are moving in 1,000 different directions all at the same time. This young man took 8 shots. Of those 8 shots, 5 were head shots. The rest, upper body shots. Now this goes way off the shoot chart because instinctually we shoot until someone drops. This boy was not shooting instinctually. This boy was shooting a game. They found that game in his basement, and you got extra points for headshots. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that everybody that plays video games are next shooters. What I am saying is that are these young people who don't have a responsible adult sitting next to them saying, this is real, this is not, because they're seeing the virtual real sounds and sights of death. Are they learning anything about the finality of death? Are they learning anything about the pain and agony of being shot themselves? No. So we have young people walking into convenience stores, robbing it. They've got the money in hand, and the attendant says something or does something. They spin around, shoot, and kill the person. And when asked why, they can't tell you why. Why? Because it was an impulse shot. Ladies and gentlemen, these people are matriculating into your workplaces. It becomes very essential to get out in front of this behavior. Now, this graphic illustrates what we're talking about. This is the critical aggression prevention system. It kind of depicts what we're talking. On the left, you have aggression first observers, and you want an army of those people. And because these are intuitive, they're very easy to learn, very easy to utilize, so therefore, in a day, they can learn these skill sets. And as I say, you want an army. You want them in the parking lots if you can. Receptionists, obviously, is a key person. Human resource people, mental health professionals. Anybody who's on the front line of aggressive behavior should be an aggression first observer. Then you have the small core group of people, the certified aggression managers, and then the moment the first observer calls in, and they say, this is what we're seeing, they can turn to the software. In a very simple drop-down method, they can put in what the first observer is seeing. It tells them immediately what level of aggression this is, thereby the presumption of threat. Enabling then the certified aggression manager or team to decide what resources do I need to approach this person to maximize my result? Or do I need to engage at all based upon what we're hearing? So they make a determination. They go out and they engage. They come back and they record. What did I see? How did I respond? What was the result? It demonstrates that you've been objective through the process. You've done everything possible to make your workplace as safe as possible. The highest form of evidence-based best practices. It scientifically validates it in real time. Then you can, if this is a person who you want to get some counseling, the system has a tickler system in to get back, then you evaluate using the meter of emerging aggression, which assesses the intent to harm, determine that this person is no longer a threat to the workplace. So now that person can come back to work. And what the real value is at the end of the year, you can demonstrate and stand up and say, you know, we don't expect a lot of 7, 8s, and 9s. We expect a lot of 3, 4s, and 5s, right? And at the end of the year, we say, let's say we've had 100 3, 4s, and 5s have gone through the program. And of that 100, 90 have been deemed no longer to be a threat to the workplace, so they're productive members of our team. Of the remaining 10, 5 are in counseling, and 5 have been suspended pending a more thorough investigation. Therefore, our workplaces are as safe as possible. And that quantifiable result can actually convince a chief financial officer, the enemy of any initiative that can't be quantified. Now this can be. Aggression first observers, They're the basis for this to make it work. These individuals are taught to recognize emerging aggression. They're taught to report using consistent terminologies, and they follow specific procedure. How wonderful is that? That everybody falls in line, because that's the way the system works. The certified aggression managers, those are the brains of the operation. They assess risk using the meter of emerging aggression. The MEA is the meter of emerging aggression software service. They document it in an appropriate and validates, it scientifically validates in real time. They have a response plan based upon policies, because that's how the system works, and they can track and follow up over time. Truly a significant measure of aggressive behavior in the workplace. Oh, and we do have what we call ambassadors training. These are train the trainers type of people. We do this webinar based, so you don't have to travel or do anything else. And I think the next one is April 6th through the 9th. It's 4 days of webinar based training, and at the end of it you come out credentialed to train others in this program. The software is very straightforward. You'll notice here that you can look at the different colorations. You see at the bottom right-hand corner, there is the legend that shows the level of threat based upon the 5 levels of mild, moderate, elevated, severe, and extreme. Then that information goes within the incident report, where everything is collected, and you can upload documents, videos, and pictures. And then you can track over time. You can determine that a person is improved but not yet ready to come back to work. And the software can be the meter of emerging aggression software. Both gives you a threat level output, notifies and reminds you as information needs to be. It promotes consistent terminology and assessment. That's critical. And it connects the dots. Ladies and gentlemen, instead of having departmental silos, those things collapse, because you have human resource, security, safety. Everybody's talking on the same page. You can organize and keep policy and procedure in this. It is a secure, available repository of incident reports, observations, and actions taken. So CABS provides the safest possible organization, the highest form of evidence-based best practices. Responses are timely, preventative, consistent, documented, and therefore effective. Here's Dr. Claire Good. She's the head of the Student Assistant and Intervention Team at Eastern Kentucky University. She's had the most experience with this. She has said that this provides an ability to intervene in a timely and appropriate manner, i.e. prevention. It responds closely to the meter of emerging aggression. There's your scientific validation. In other words, what they saw was consistent with what the meter gave them. And incidentally, their legal department loved this program. Loved this program. So, also, if you're in the healthcare industry, we have the COTS organization, the Central Ohio Trauma System. Their director of safety said this is an essential program, new way of thinking, truly preventative. And there's Edward Sisko, the chief at LaGuardia Community College. This program brought departments together. That's the key. With a common dialogue, an ability for us to communicate on the same page. Implementing CAPS is very simple. You train 1 day for aggression first observers, 2 days for certified aggression managers. You implement the software, and in 3 days you're implemented. It's really quite that simple. Okay, there's this image. As you leave the room, Christine has got the sheets over there. Take a sheet, circle what you think, who you think the terrorist is, or who you think the terrorists are, plural. Bring it to our booth, and I'll tell you whether you've got it right and whether you don't, and if you don't, I'll explain why. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
The Boston suspects for the bombing.
Yes.
What would they fall under? Would they be Primal or Continuum? Because they tried to live, they tried to escape.
Yes, they're at an 8th level. They're in an 8th level. They're like combatants. They're murderers. They're not going to give up their life for a cause. Like Osama bin Laden had no intention of giving up his life for this cause. He was going to inspire other people to do so.
So likely they would attack
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions? I know we've covered a great deal of ground, and it sometimes takes a moment to assimilate. So I'll be at the booth. Please come up to Christine or I. Don't forget to get your sheet up there from her as you leave. Have a great lunch. Thank you very much. Thank you.